Everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good day from wherever you're calling in. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be talking Bridging the Gap Rural EV Charging Programs. My name is Simbiat Yusuf. I am the events manager at Fourth. We look forward to a wonderful conversation today, and we'll be talking about programs powering up rural communities. Before we start, I have a few announcements from the Fourth team. Attendees, we ask that you please submit your questions through the attendee chat. We will get through them during the Q&A portion of our webinar. We will also be sharing the webinar slides as well as the recording and additional resources. So if you miss anything, not to worry, you'll get the recording shortly after. And please do put your questions in as we go through the presentations. We would love to get to them at the end. I see some people say they don't have sound. If you do not have sound, please try refreshing the screen. We'll put a note in the chat. And if you are new to the Fourth webinars, or you're new to Fourth and you haven't heard that name before, we are Fourth. We are a nonprofit organization which envisions a world where clean and equitable transportation systems move everyone and everything. We are on a mission to bring people together to create solutions. Our work is done in 5 focus areas, which are access to electric cars, access to charging, access to emerging modes, events and partnerships, and policy advocacy. If you would like to learn more about Fourth and our programs, we will drop a link shortly to find more information about us and what we do. And our work at Fourth will not be possible without the support of our members and sponsors. If you're looking at sponsorship opportunities for this webinar, membership opportunities so you can get in communication with other members at Fourth, or if you like to sponsor an event called Roadmap, we have a special guest that will talk about that shortly, but you can also reach out to my colleague, our partnerships and membership manager, Rachel Havenkamp. Email on the screen, but we will also make sure to share that with you all. And now I will pass it along to Jeff. Jeff will give us some spiel about the upcoming Roadmap Conference, which I know everyone is probably already registered for. Jeff? Jeff, we can't hear you.
Well, we're improvising here. Hopefully you all can hear me now. Sorry about that. But thankfully we're in the same offices. So my name is Jeff Allen. I'm Executive Director of Fourth. I appreciate you letting me crash the party today. Really excited about the way that our Roadmap Conference is shaping up. It is just over 4 months away, less than 20 weeks. I didn't count the hours, but it's coming up fast. And for those of you who haven't been to Roadmap yet, you're in for a treat. We're going to be in Detroit this year for the first time out of the Pacific Northwest. And I wanted to share a couple of updates. First and foremost, our program is now live. And this is when things really start to get real. So if you go over to the program link, which the team will drop in the chat, you can see the session titles. You can see us beginning to populate the speakers. We will ultimately have something like 100 different speakers on 24 different panels on a range of topics, as well as some amazing keynote speakers. We're very excited to announce the first of those today, Carla Walker-Miller, CEO and founder of Walker-Miller Energy Services, who's going to be able to really ground us in the history of innovation in Detroit, the automotive industry and mobility, and how that has impacted the region through the lens of equity. So really excited to welcome her. And as I say, you'll start to see other speakers being confirmed in the days ahead. If you have not been to Roadmap, the thing that's really most amazing and unique about Roadmap is the way, much like Forth itself, it brings together all of the diverse stakeholders in the mobility ecosystem, automotive OEMs, charging companies, government agencies at all levels, community-based organizations, consulting firms. They will all be at Roadmap, and you should be too. Also wanted to note that we're going to be covering, as you'll see on that program page, a whole range of cutting edge topics that need those stakeholders to be engaged to get them resolved. That includes everything from what is happening with fast charging standards in the post-Tesla NACS era to how are we going to rapidly build out the charging infrastructure for heavy duty electric trucks? How are we going to grow a more diverse and vibrant EV workforce? How are we going to accelerate the necessary utility investments, and so much more. So please check out the program. More importantly, while you're there, get registered, because registration early adopter rate is going to close on June 24th. So that's just a few weeks away. So now is the time to book your tickets, get your travel, grab a hotel room from our block while the getting is good. This is also a great time to think about how your company wants to show up and be seen at Roadmap. We still have sponsorship opportunities available. We still have exhibit spaces available. And we make those intentionally affordable, particularly the exhibit spaces start at about $3,500, because we want that whole ecosystem to be represented. So we don't want that to be a barrier for anybody to show up. So join your colleagues at companies like Uber, DTE, ABB, JLL, BMW. If your company is an acronym, you should definitely be there. But even if it isn't, you should be there. You should be sponsoring. You should consider exhibiting and hooking up with the rest of the EV ecosystem at Roadmap in just a few months. So thank you very much for letting me crash the party here. Sorry about the technical challenges.
No problem. Thank you so much, Jeff. And we welcome everyone to the Coachella of EV conferences. And with that, I don't want to delay our content further. I will have our moderator, Tomas Endicott, which is the Senior Program Manager at Bonneville Environmental Foundation.
Thank you, Symbiot, and thank you, Jeff. I have attended the Roadmap conference several times in the last few years, and it is a great conference. Good morning to everyone, and thank you for attending here. We are doing Bridging the Gap rural EV charging programs, and also thank you to our speakers for joining us. My name is Tomas Endicott. I'll be the moderator for this webinar, and I am a senior program manager with the renewables team at Bonneville Environmental Foundation. BEF is a nonprofit organization based in Portland, Oregon, and for 25 years, we've worked at the intersection of water, energy, and carbon. Historically, our renewables team here at BEF has supported more than 120 mostly rural public utilities in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Western Montana who purchase wholesale power from the Bonneville Power Administration, BPA, which runs the federal system in the Columbia River Basin and produces 17 gigawatts of power on the Columbia. These utilities include municipal utilities, rural electric co-ops, public utility districts, and we also work with local governments, tribes, and nonprofits within the BPA service territory to develop renewable energy programs and projects, including transportation electrification. Our mission is focused on programs and projects that deliver benefits to low-income and disadvantaged communities who are excited to join in the energy transition. BEF has been a member of Forth for several years now, and I personally have been privileged to partner with the talented and dedicated staff at Forth to develop some innovative transportation electrification projects, including EV car sharing and electrification of off-road farming and construction equipment. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today and ask each panelist to turn on their camera as I introduce them. Bob Coates is part of the financial analysis branch at USDA Rural Utilities Service. He serves as the electric program's chief of financial analysis for the Grid Security Division. He is an electrical engineer and a project management professional. Welcome, Bob. Next, we have David Skakel, who is a senior specialist with Fourth. He serves as the senior specialist for agricultural electrification program and the emerging modes team. He brings experience from nonprofit startups, hazardous waste and recycling management, farmers markets, used building materials, deconstruction services, and community-based sustainable living practices. Welcome, David. Stephanie Crawford is the Regulatory Affairs Director for NRECA, the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. And in her role, Stephanie advocates on behalf of electric co-ops on issues regarding electric vehicles and other types of distributed energy resources, as well as supply chain issues. Welcome, Stephanie. And finally, Shelbi Small. Shelbi is an environmental protection specialist in energy analysis and sustainability. She's the Tribal Nations Technical Assistance Lead at the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. Shelbi joined the Joint Office in November of 22 and has experience with Bureau of Indian Affairs in assisting with natural resource and renewable energy projects on tribal lands, as well as grant management and project oversight. Welcome, Shelbi. So thank you all for joining. We're going to kick off here first thing with an icebreaker question, and I'd like to ask attendees to answer the question in the chat. And the question is, why is transportation electrification and EV charging critical in rural communities? Give everybody just a minute to answer, and I'll offer up from BEF's perspective, since we do work in many rural communities, that of course EVs and charging are super important to the utilities. They have to provide power to residential and commercial customers, and we often talk about the fact that EVs are just large appliances, or in some cases for fleet charging, maybe large commercial pieces of equipment that the utilities need to serve. And so they're all interested in getting prepared to transition many vehicles in the rural areas to electric. Let's see, and maybe we'll see a few answers here. Equity certainly is important. Rural regions often have greater vehicle miles traveled, which I think we'll talk about. Certainly EVs are really nice if you're traveling a lot of miles. The efficiency and transportation is often a barrier in rural areas, also very true. So with that, let me pass it over to our first speaker, Shelbi Small from the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. Shelbi, take it away.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. My name is Shelbi Small, and I'm the Tribal Technical Assistance Lead for the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. And today I'll be talking to you about EV charging resources and technical assistance for rural and tribal communities. So first, I'm going to talk about some U.S. Department of Transportation resources and the Rural EV Toolkit. So the U.S. Department of Transportation Routes Initiative, which is the Rural Opportunities to Use Transportation for Economic Success initiative, aims to address disparities in rural transportation infrastructure and improve safety and economic competitiveness nationwide. They engage rural communities to better understand their transportation needs and work together to identify solutions, and also work to harmonize DOT programs to best support rural mobility using the Routes Council to lead departmental activities. They also utilize a whole of government approach by partnering with other federal agencies, initiatives, and regional commissions to expand the department's presence in rural America. Too fast. All right. So this routes document, the EV Toolkit, is a one-stop shop for EV and rural resources. So as you can see here on the screen, the rural opportunity or the routes DOT website gives information about the routes team. And it also has webinars, tools and toolkits, funding opportunities, which also includes a new DOT discretionary grants dashboard. And they also have monthly newsletters. So there's a lot of information and a lot of rural resources on the routes website. All right. So more information in the Rural EV Infrastructure Toolkit. So this information includes personal EV infrastructure deployment, but is most relevant for rural entities seeking to install charging stations for broader public or private use. So this Rural EV Infrastructure Toolkit includes electric vehicle basics. It includes partnership opportunities, how to get started, benefits and challenges of rural vehicle electrification, as well as expanded content on tribal planning, transit vehicles, school buses, micromobility, and also new funding programs under the bipartisan infrastructure law. All right, so this toolkit is intended for rural entities, including states, local communities, tribes, transportation provider, businesses, nonprofits, and individuals. So it really covers a huge slew of folks who are in this realm and really can benefit a lot of these entities. All right, so within this toolkit, there is a rural EV infrastructure funding table. It includes opportunities specific for rural and tribal entities and can be sorted by the types of funding you're looking for, such as light duty vehicle, charging infrastructure, micro mobility infrastructure, workforce development, and vehicle acquisition. And these funding types also include discretionary grants, loans, and technical assistance. So a really great resource to have there in that funding list. So now I want to talk a little bit about the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. So the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation was stood up in 2021 through the bipartisan infrastructure law and a memorandum of understanding between Department of Transportation and Department of Energy. It was stood up to provide guidance and assistance to bill programs that relate to electric vehicle charging deployment, such as the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure or NEVI program, the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Program, the Low No Emissions Transit Bus Program, and the Clean School Bus Program. So what we've done at the Joint Office is created a resource page that serves as an EV tribal companion to that rural EV toolkit. So we took out anything that was tribally relevant to that EV toolkit and put it onto our tribal nations page, so tribes can go there, and it's kind of a one-stop shop for tribes to get there. They don't have to go looking around all of DOT's websites, all of EPA's websites. We're really trying to consolidate and curate this page to be as easy to use as possible. So this was created to offer tribes a quick and efficient means in identifying the most relevant and timely EV funding opportunities, and also locating EV-specific resources and project examples. There's other relevant tribal information on there that was taken directly from the Rural EV Toolkit, as well as other resources from other agencies. So that resource page is really great, and that's right at the bottom of this. Oh, I did not forward that, sorry. Yep, and that resource page is on the bottom of the screen. The Joint Office has worked with the White House Council of Native American Affairs, their Electric Vehicle Subcommittee group, and has put together this curated selection of tribally specific resources. So this is just another glance at what we have. We have the funding opportunities. We have technical assistance resources, not only for technical assistance through the Joint Office, but also for technical assistance through other offices, as well as EV project and partnership examples, and award announcements. So I want to talk a little bit about our tribal technical assistance. So We do offer technical assistance through the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, including planning for deployment of EV chargers and zero-emission fueling infrastructure, strategic planning for fleet electrification, route analysis and planning. Really anything that you can think of, you can definitely get a hold of the Joint Office, and not just tribally specific, but you can contact the Joint Office through their webpage and ask questions that you might have regarding your community and vehicle deployment. So please feel free to reach out to us. There are a lot of other examples of technical assistance that are not on this page that we can provide. And then just one more thing, I wanted to let you guys know that we do have EV funding opportunities on our webpage. They are mostly tribal specific, and they are on the screen as you can see. They are updated monthly. So if you have any questions, definitely let me know and I can answer those for you. But thank you everybody for your time, and I look forward to talking to you.
Great. Thank you, Shelbi. I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, please enter them in the chat, and we will have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. And I would now like to pass it over to Bob Coates from USDA Rural Electric Service. Bob.
Great. Thomas? Thanks, Thomas. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that we have for funding here within the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and more specifically with rural development. Let's see how quickly we can run through this. Okay, so in essence, what's the impact? What's the EV impact on, in rural America? Cooperatives are electric co-ops, and NRECA is going to talk about this in a bit too, but they serve about 20% of Americans. But the cooperative service territory actually covers about 70% of America's highway route miles, which is a disproportionate amount, obviously, especially of the lower 48. Many rural areas really do not have sufficient power lines to handle DC fast chargers at somewhere between 20 and 50 megawatts apiece, or even to provide three-phase power to farms and businesses. So the system really was not designed for that, starting in 1935. It's grown since then, but EVs and data centers and things like that really are they're taxing the system significantly. So especially with EVs, there's a very tight implementation timeline, and also quite a few funding questions as to how folks are going to be able to pay for this. Next slide. Benefits to EVs, EV buses, over-the-road trucks, EV farms, and construction equipment in rural America. Really, they're there to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, lower the total cost of ownership, improve air quality, especially on farms and school buses. I mean, these poor kids are going to school. They're being bused to school 30, 40, 50 minutes away, and riding a gasoline or diesel-powered bus, which spews out emissions and leaks into the buses themselves. On farms, same situation. You see these semis full of corn, for instance, and the diesel's just belching black gases onto the corn, which either you, myself, or our animals are going to eat. They also have improved power, and frankly, they've reduced maintenance as well. So USDA has a Rural Power Drive initiative. We've developed programs that can be used to leverage federal, state, and private sector investments to support the development and deployment of electric vehicle charging stations serving rural America. USDA is collaborating with other federal agencies to achieve this goal. We do not at USDA have anti-stacking rules where others do. But when it comes to the NEVI program, for instance, if you need additional funds to fulfill the actual implementation of a NEVI-sponsored level 3 charger, for instance, we can help as long as it's in a rural area. But we can use existing programs and authorities to provide affordable financing to expand the availability of EV charging infrastructure in rural areas. We can also leverage EV infrastructure investment into further economic development, which is a focus for us. We can also enhance the broadband rollout in rural communities, and any opportunity we have to enhance broadband is a good thing, both through our telecom program and through our electric program. We do also foster a network of EV infrastructure leaders and tradespersons in rural communities. Okay, come on. There we go. So what can a rural housing service do? We have three or four different programs: rural housing, the water program, telecom program, and the electric program. So with rural housing, through our community facilities programs, we can finance nonprofit and municipal vehicles serving community needs. This is the only program we have that actually will finance something with wheels or tracks. Related community-based charging infrastructure, and community-owned and serving charging stations. Single-family housing, 502, 504 programs, can finance homes that include electrical service and charging stations suitable for home charging. And that's level 1 and level 2. Multifamily housing, which to me is the elephant in the room because of the difficulty in actually providing chargers for these areas. They can provide charging stations through improvements or in new construction. And also through our Rural Energy for America program, which got a big boost from the IRA. They offer loans and grants to farms and small businesses through energy efficiency projects, which could include or EV chargers. Our electric infrastructure program, which is actually about a $6 billion a year program, provides infrastructure improvements for EV chargers for the electric system in general in rural America. And the program that I run, the Rural Energy Savings Program, provides behind-the-meter EV chargers and gap funding above the infrastructure law. I want to talk to you a little bit more about the electric infrastructure program and RESP as well. But the electric infrastructure program can finance electric utility-owned charging stations and network infrastructure to include the charging stations themselves, service lines to supply those, smart grid or fiber connections to charging stations, which is absolutely critical to their operation, heavying up of power lines, demand-side management, metering. Really, that's generally done by the utility, but there can be secondary metering as well, and energy storage and a renewable power supply. I mean, the optimum situation would be to have an EV charger at a big box store or something along that line where folks could actually charge and either eat, shop, do whatever, and also have some energy storage device and a renewable storage or a renewable power supply in that same area to create a distributed energy resource. And what can RESP and ECLIP do? We haven't talked about ECLIP, but we will. The Rural Energy Savings Program is designed to provide energy efficiency services as a relending program for rural areas, to customers in rural areas. Those entities can include all utilities, not just electric, but all utilities, energy efficiency entities, for-profits or nonprofits, municipalities, and the tribes. And their customer would be anybody that's tied to a meter of some type. In rural America, rural is 50,000 or less in this program. That's businesses, municipalities, individuals, tribes, schools, et cetera, et cetera. And we provide 0% financing to our borrower, is the eligible entity above. The borrower then relends to the customer at a rate of no higher than 5% for up to 10 years. It does require a regular service bill. On-bill financing is certainly available, tariff financing, things like that. That's all eligible. The Energy Efficiency and Conservation Loan Program, it's kind of a subset of the infrastructure program. So there's about $6 billion a year available. But they can also finance relending and system energy measures, energy efficiency measures, to include investments related to beneficial electrification. Next slide, I want to show you some, and Shelbi did this earlier, but web links. The BIL link is there, the NEVI Toolkit program, the EPA's Clean Bus Initiative, the REST program, CF program, and the REAP website. I did not include RHS, I apologize. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and my contact information is here. Thank you again for the opportunity. Thomas, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob. And as Symbiot mentioned at the beginning, the slides will be provided after the presentation, so you will have all those links available to follow up with that information. Next, we have Stephanie Crawford from NRECA. Take it away, Stephanie.
All right, thank you very much, Thomas. Good to be with you all and appreciate the invitation to speak with this group. Just to kick things off, I'm Stephanie Crawford, Regulatory Affairs Director with NRECA. That's the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. And we're the national trade association representing 900 not-for-profit, consumer-owned electric cooperatives across the country. And as Bob alluded to, in total, our members provide 42 million Americans across 48 states with affordable, reliable power every day. And just let's talk a little bit about our business model to kick things off, because it actually plays into how we think about transportation electrification and making these opportunities more feasible for our consumer members, as well as how we respond to requests for things like public charging sites in our areas. So if you think back to the 1930s, many rural and farming communities did not have electricity because they were deemed too expensive to serve. And so thankfully, as a result of the Rural Electrification Act, cooperatives were allowed to form and using government financing to do that. And that's why we have such a close relationship still with USDA and specifically the Rural Utilities Service. But at their core, cooperatives are not-for-profit, meaning all costs borne by the cooperative are ultimately passed on to their consumer members. There are no shareholders. And also, we refer to them as consumer members or member owners, you may hear, because the cooperative is owned by the people that it's served by. And it's governed by democratically elected boards from folks across the membership. And that makes, I think, cooperatives very unique and uniquely tied to the communities that they serve. They tend to pride themselves on being that trusted energy advisor to their communities. And we see this playing out certainly in the EV charging landscape today. And I like to show this map in part to show just the scale of kind of the areas that we serve. Like I mentioned, we serve 48 states. Given our span and reach across the country, we really feel that cooperatives have an important role as the nation continues to build out via public funds and private funds a nationwide EV charging network. It's critical that cooperatives are involved and also will be serving many of these sites in the public charging space in particular to ensure that rural communities are connected as transportation electrification proceeds, that they're not left behind. And you'll also notice too that as EV adoption proceeds at varying paces across the country, some areas faster adoption, some less so, you'll see that cooperatives probably correspondingly have more programs or have a little further along in addressing this than others where they're not seeing the adoption just yet. The cooperative is definitely very focused on meeting their consumers' needs and their consumers' interests. So if their consumers are bringing it to them that they want the co-op to develop incentive programs or other offerings to meet that need, they're seeing higher adoption, you're likely going to see more offerings available. So there's multiple things that our members are looking at as they're thinking about transportation electrification, not unlike any other utilities, but certainly from the residential perspective. How are they going to serve their members at their homes, knowing that most light-duty vehicle charging is occurring at the home? How are they going to be providing or serving any public charging sites in their areas, if any, for the foreseeable future, depending on these very rural areas? how are they going to serve some of what we call key accounts, some of those larger CNI types accounts? Do these existing customers or potentially new customers have fleet electrification plans? And then certainly in school buses, many times the school or schools is the largest customer account for the co-ops in some of these rural areas. And so any plans they have for electrification is very important. And so they do a lot of member outreach and engagement to understand what do their members in these various segments want now and looking forward, and how will that impact the broader cooperative. And one piece of this, again, is beyond member outreach and trying to answer these questions for how they prepare to meet the needs of transportation electrification, is receiving data. And that's helping them understand how to prepare for where to plan for EVs coming, how are they going to serve those different loads? Is it going to be adding to their peak demand? What are the associated costs with that? Are there tools they can use to mitigate those potential peaks? And when, how fast is this load coming on? And they're using already today various programs such as trying to understand within their areas, how many folks have EVs, trying to understand what the load profiles are doing already, using this via incentives like rates. And then now some are doing telematics pilots so that they may potentially not need to do dual metering, which again contributes to lower costs able to serve this load. I'll just mention that we're very focused on these three big buckets of federal funding, noting that our members are not eligible in most cases to apply for this funding directly, but we're certainly being asked to serve these loads coming on as a result of these projects. And a very important issue to us is that while there's a lot of funding for EV charging equipment and in front of the meter investments, there really isn't grid side funding tied. And so that's where potentially the USDA funding that Bob mentioned may help to supplement that in the case of NEBI. And so we have a consortium, I won't belabor it, but we have a consortium of members who are very active and interested. We bring them together and educate them on the different programs. These are different resources you can use to engage your members. We bring them together to pursue federal funding opportunities. And we engage with a variety of stakeholders, some of which are on this call, because we know that it's going to take a whole ecosystem to help enable more transportation electrification and also ensure that our perspective is represented in that. And I will just mention that we do have a project that's underway with DOE. We're still negotiating it, but it's meant to address the interconnection timelines that we know can be lengthy for connecting EV charging sites. And this is meant to address how can cooperatives do this in a very efficient way and understand how these different projects are going to affect their system. And also, as they get more and more of these requests, how can they replicate that and not reinvent the wheel every time? So I will just leave it there and look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. And finally, we have David Skakel from Fourth. Take it away, David.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. So I work on a mix of agricultural electrification and rural EV charging. So my focus is rural based. And in my talk, I'm going to take you on a little tour from macro to micro. USDA tasked Forth with developing a EV charging project in a rural county in the U.S. That happens to be Wasco County, Oregon, where I live. So for perspective, the photo you see there is the joint use facility in the town I live in, Mosier, Oregon. Fire department on the left, city hall on the right. We fortunately do have a city administrator, but some of the towns we work with have no paid staff, just to give you a sense of perspective. So in this project, we were tasked with developing an EV charging infrastructure plan for all of this rural county. Now it's almost 2,400 square miles geographically and about 25,000 people. So a very sparse density, maybe 10 to 11 people per square mile. And what we did was put together a stakeholder group of representatives of the half a dozen small towns comprised of this county, plus one Indian tribe, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, into a succession of high-level educational meetings about EVs and EV charging, transitioning into more one-on-one meetings about to help us understand and identify some of the potential projects in their communities. We're developing this is a project that's we're midway through it. We're developing a map, melding data from an outside consultant about transportation and the built environment with the local county's demographic data as well. And we're there to provide funding assistance to the degree that we can, help these communities apply for funding, and also develop a playbook of anecdotes for things that are unique to the rural environment in this work. And finally, demonstration events. So we call them here at Fourth Ride and Drives. We had our last one for this project in the Dalles, Oregon last Thursday. And if you can imagine, in a small town with out in front of the Chamber of Commerce, 3 or 4 car dealerships lining up a dozen electric cars, trucks, vans, electric motorcycles, GEM cars, e-bikes, electric tractors and farm equipment, UTVs, all-terrain vehicles, and even a go-forth car share car. So we're actually finding that demonstration events are very important to catalyzing interest in EVs. After all, the utilization of EV charging is commensurate with interest in EVs themselves. So we hope to be a conduit between rural communities and state and federal funders. We hope to bridge that gap in this project. But from the funding perspective, there's a palpable need for expediency and a tendency, understandably, towards bundling small rural projects into fewer, larger aggregate funding proposals. And that approach both solves problems and creates new ones. Through our work on this project, we're gaining a deeper understanding of issues unique to rural, including technical knowledge, a lack of it, and access to data, capacity by these small communities for grant administration and subsequent project management, and the things that we take for granted. Internet access. Here's a picture of level 2 charger put in at the county fairgrounds in Wasco County recently, but nary any internet access, which equates to charging access. Contractors we hear this all the time. It's a problem with interest and availability to work in remote locations. And as I mentioned, aggregated funding, though we understand it's very important to pull numerous small projects together in order to get this work out in a momentous way. The more you bundle, it seems the more you complicate. There's cultural issues. I won't go deep into it, but let's just say it's not kumbaya out in the hinterlands so much. And we don't go into, we have a sensitivity. We enter rural areas not as disruptors, but we discreetly try to, we locate and work with early adopters. We find these ride and drive events really help. And also paying attention to the super users who have really high per capita driving footprint. And finally, there's just issues out there where there's not, potentially we need to find, there's not a lot of 480 3-phase electricity, as was said before. So we're on the search for other technologies like standalone solar charging, or maybe 240 volt in concert with batteries that provide quick charging in rural areas. So my takeaways include that data alone does not provide the answers that we need in these rural areas, and data and local knowledge do. It leads to better decision making as to what and where and why to do this type of charging. Otherwise, we wouldn't know in a small town like Antelope, Oregon, which has 35 people population wise, no staff, why it deserves a slew of level 2 charging and probably a quick charger as well. So, why a dot on the map in the middle of Eastern Oregon should deserve that amount of charging, which it does. So, otherwise, aggregated funding appears to be present some significant challenges, and we need to figure out ways to maybe have more flexibility in doling out some of the funds for the projects they're easy to identify but tough to get funded. And finally, it's a bit of a hard sell out in rural areas, and we best understand the weak spots and the challenges stemming from the recipient's point of view if we are to succeed in leveraging the substantial amount of funding committed towards our objectives in rural EV development. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And thank you to all the presenters. So I think now we're going to move into Q&A. So I'd like all the presenters to turn their cameras on. And we're going to start with a little bit of round robin here, I think, with my first question, and give everybody a minute or so to answer. And we've had a number of questions in the chat regarding DC fast chargers and the challenges to DC fast chargers to utilities and just in general to installing in rural areas. You all mentioned NEVI and the Community Fueling Infrastructure Program. So I'm just curious from each of you a minute or so on the challenges to DC fast chargers in rural communities. And David, why don't we start with you and we'll work backwards.
Well, as I mentioned in my talk, I think one of the biggest problems in rural areas is the lack of three-phase. And so, what the promise may be some emerging technologies that use 240 volt in batteries to accomplish the same task.
Excellent. Stephanie, have some thoughts from the utility perspective?
Yeah, it's a difficult issue. It's one that we talk quite a lot about. I think generally our members have a lot of different rate availabilities, different menus of rate options. And so they can do things like varying customer charges, energy charges, having different ratchets for certain kW thresholds. We're seeing different options. Certainly, deploying DER also on site is an option that people can consider. But it's one that they really need to balance supporting economic development, which they want to do, as well as making sure that the co-op and the rest of the consumer base that owns the co-op is made whole. In particular for communities that are not using EVs and it's really just pass-through traffic, that's a tough one when the community itself may not be using it. They may be charging at home, for example. So it's an issue to work through that we hear about a lot.
Great. I know there were a few comments in the chat about demand charges and how that's a real challenge potentially for utilities on DC fast charging. Bob, do you have some thoughts on this one?
Oh, hours worth. In reality, I mean, it's not just it's the power. Most of the rural America is fed by a single phase distribution line, and in the 12 to 15 kV class, that will not satisfy a level 3 charger at all. So for the NEVI program, for instance, folks have to pay for miles and miles of acceptable 3-phase power, which is about $120,000 a mile to heavy up. So just imagine if you're 20 miles away from the closest sufficient power line, how much that's going to cost. And that's where USDA gets involved and helps to fund some of that. But even with farmers, they want to move to electrified their vehicles, and Same thing. They've got a single phase line feeding them. Three-phase power is pretty much untenable, so they're going to have to go to some form of a distributed energy resource until there's sufficient capacity to bring that line to their farm. So yeah, there's that broadband access so that you have a feedback loop, the ability to bill for those that charge time, et cetera, and Stephanie brought up the issues with rates, et cetera. There's so many things that need to be ironed out all at the same time that it's a real challenge for those of us that are dealing with the rural electric cooperatives.
And all great points. Shelbi.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Bob said. You know, lack of broadband, and then again, like we're seeing more in probably tribal areas, but in a lot of rural areas also is lack of maintained roads. A lot of roads aren't paved, so getting EVs out there in general, but along the lines of transmission infrastructure and charging infrastructure, there just really isn't, like Bob said, a lot of infrastructure out to these places where you would want to put EV charging. So yeah, I think to meet that challenge, it's putting EV charging in, at your gas station, at a community center where people are really going to be using it and have a high utilization rate.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to go to a question here from Allison Dennis, who mentions that she's in a small rural coastal community and that just trying to navigate all the options for funding and technical assistance is really challenging. And we also know that many small communities are challenged just with the capacity of staff that they have to research and respond to opportunities. So I'm interested if you all have thoughts on the best way to approach that and sort of how to begin to interface with all the opportunities and navigate. And I guess I'll start this time with Stephanie.
Well, it is a challenge, and even just from our own members' perspective around all the infrastructure law programs, for example, and IRA programs, we stood up a hub for our members to access because there are so many different programs and moving parts, and to have a day job of keeping the lights on and maintaining their systems, and instead of applying for grants is not something they've typically done. So we certainly empathize with that, and I would just say that within your own communities, if there are entities like cooperatives or even just some of your more local like chambers of commerce or your counties who are keeping tabs on these different opportunities that have come up, just reach out and have a conversation. It does take time, but that's going to potentially lead to very fruitful opportunities that maybe you weren't even aware were out there. That's kind of what we've seen in terms of how this has played out.
Great. I know there have been a lot of resources presented in the slide decks here, so everyone can reference those after the fact as well. David, you have thoughts on this one?
Well, I would add that maybe a chamber of commerce could identify funding sources and help a rural coastal community, but who's going to help write a grant and manage EV projects in these rural areas? And this is what I was getting to in my talk, where when you're talking about small communities that don't even have paid staff, you actually need maybe a more evolved role for cooperatives. I was looking at the map that Stephanie provided. It looks like a real potential there for a stronger role for cooperatives in order for nonprofits. Like give a plug here for Fourth, but this is some of the work we're doing right now for USDA is helping identify and then create funding projects for those communities that they can get as far as identifying the project and no further.
Great. Shelbi and Bob, you both presented excellent information and links to lots of different programs at the federal level. Do you have other thoughts, Shelbi?
Yeah, so I just threw in the chat sorry. I just threw in the chat the Rural EV Toolkit link, which is really great because that link actually links to other relevant EV resources. So you're not, scouring the whole internet for all of these EV resources. You can go to that link and that will kind of bring you to where you need to be in the rural sector. And then I just want to say that for communities and rural communities, definitely check out the Joint Office website. We do have a TA 101 resource. We have a bunch of written resources. And we also just put together an EV infrastructure playbook. So that is for communities from like step one. This is kind of what EV infrastructure is. This is how you would deploy it in this setting. This is like how you go about it. So that's really helpful also.
Thank you. And Bob, additional thoughts?
Yeah, that toolkit's wonderful. It really is. It's been well done, and you've expanded it a number of times. NACO, National League of Cities, NRECA, NASIO, EESI, Fourth. There's a number of folks out that are doing a lot of that. But the one thing that you want to learn is you're not doing this alone. So the last thing you want to do is reinvent the wheel 5,000 times. So the best thing to do is to work with others that are in the process of doing this, and find as many sources as you can so that you can minimize that first effort that all of us are so scared to do. And don't have the time to do, frankly. Just like your caller or your member was saying that they don't have the staff to do it. You're right, and many others don't either. But there are those that are trying to help as much as possible. So reach out and don't hesitate to reach out to more than one group. You can certainly reach out to us. I'm sure Shelbi same way. NRECA especially through their cooperatives. We've got friends all over the country that are more than willing to help in any way they can.
Great, thank you. And in the last 2 minutes or so here, this will be a bit of a rapid fire, but I just want to mention we talked about fleets and public and private fleets, the opportunities there for rural fleets, and also the role of utilities to provide power to those larger fleet charging situations. So I'm wondering your thoughts about maybe some early movers who have taken advantage of this, or also what fleets might have the greatest opportunity for benefit in rural areas. And Bob, let's start with you.
We're really not just dealing with wheeled vehicles, and that frankly scares me to death. I was a power engineer at Pepco 40 years ago, and our two biggest loads, one was the Metro system, the other was the Pentagon, and they were both in the 37 to 40 megawatt range. Every fast charger group for over-the-road trucks is going to be at least 40 megawatts. And that really scares the electric industry because that's on a range with data centers and things like that. And we're not equipped to carry them, frankly, at least not now, where they're working quickly to do it. But the whole idea of these fleets, go back to the manufacturers and see if you can get some help there, because if they're in this to sell it, they need to find a way to help you to power it. So check with them as well.
Yeah. Shelbi, thoughts that are specific to tribal reservations and tribal nations?
Yeah, can you state the question again? I'm so sorry.
Oh, just the fleet charging and opportunities for fleets out there in the rural areas.
Yeah, so I can speak definitely on tribal reservations. I know Cherokee Band in North Carolina has done a lot of work getting their clean school buses transitioned over. And the Joint Office actually has a Clean Bus Planning Award that just came out about a month and a half ago. It's not a funding award. It's actually a technical assistance award. So you can apply for that on a rolling basis. It's going to be open. And it's to provide to create a transition plan for your fleet, because when you apply for the FTA funding, the low no emission funding, it requires a fleet transition plan. And then also just for clean school buses, it's a good thing to have in your back pocket.
Great. I see Symbiote's popped up here, so I think we're at the end of Q&A, and we'll turn it over to Symbiote here for the last minute or so. Thank you to all the speakers.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for leading the conversation today. Shelbi, Bob, David, Stephanie, again, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise on the topic. And as we say, 1 hour is never enough time to dig into these topics, but good thing we have resources and an email. And I also know we did not get through all of the questions. I know there were some specific questions to specific speakers. Do not worry, we can continue that conversation offline. This is our little appetizer, and then we'll continue offline and probably at Roadmap 2, continuing the conversation on rural charging and rural electrification. We have the contact information for our speakers here. They'll also be CC'd in our recap email. So again, we just want to thank you all for spending yet another Tuesday morning or afternoon with us at 4th. I want to give a quick plug as we all prep for the next round of the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant. Attendees of the webinar today can access a $200 off using Charge 200 to the 4th e-learning hub that provides resources and information on everything for securing federal funding to deploy charging infrastructure. So we will include the link and the QR code in our recap email, but just we're talking about charging infrastructure grants. So look into that. And we hope you can join us for our final webinar of the season. We'll continue in August, but our final webinar would be addressing the challenges of charging at multifamily housing. Join us on Tuesday, June 11th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We look forward to continuing our conversation. Thank you all again so much. Thank you again, Shelbi, Bob, David, and Stephanie. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.